You are watching Trinity Channel.
Hi, I'm Don Deal, the Director of Classical Apologetics at Norm Geisler International Ministries. Welcome to ABNSAT's Trinity Channel. Today on Spiritual Warfare, we're going to be discussing some New Age ideas and specifically the Enneagram. Today, I have with me two special people who have actually written a book on the topic. I have Don Veinot. Don, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you. At my age, it's good to be anywhere. So,
Well, we're happy you're vertical.
exactly.
And Marcia, welcome back. It's good to see you again. It's always nice to have the SES group hanging out.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back. I'm
Well,
really glad to be on with you again.
we're going to discuss specifically more of the history of the Enneagram. Last time we discussed some of it and got into broad things. We also got a lot into your backstory, Marcia,
Yeah.
which many people, I tell you in particular, my pastor, Danny, he must have mentioned that 5 times in the next several weeks at church and different services. He was very touched by your story, and particularly since he's emphasizing the power of prayer, how prayer had such an impact on your own life. Well,
Right.
the Enneagram itself, we're going to get into the details of that, but it's all part of this New Age spirituality that's trying to infiltrate the church. And for those who aren't familiar with the term New Age, it's basically it's a movement heavily focused on personal experience and a journey inward is the general definition. Many times, the ideas are monism and pantheism. Monism means there's only one thing, basically God, and pantheism means everything is God. So either the divine exists in everything or everything is God. They typically believe in energy and healing, strong focus on vibrations like chakra and such. Divination, esotericism. So they'll use astrology, tarot, and I think Marcia has a little bit of experience with astrology.
Just a little bit.
And even numerology, and to gain insights into the self. And that's a specific area we're going to be discussing today. And finally, the final thing that makes New Age different from many of the previous Western versions of religion, particularly Christianity and Judaism, is a belief in reincarnation and that spirits evolve over time. So before we get started, I want to help our audience understand who you are. So I'm going to start with you this time, Don. Who are you?
I get that a lot. There used to be a commercial I liked a lot where one was looking in a mirror and she goes, "Who am I? My hair I look like a squirrel." Sometimes I have to ask myself, "Who am I?" I am one of the co-founder and president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc., which is a mission to cults and non-Christian religions. And we do quite a number of things, including going to pagan conferences and fairs to hang out with witches and Wiccans and Druids and Satanists and talk with them about what they believe, why they believe it, and hopefully be able to share the gospel. Well, we discovered roughly 70 to 80% of them had grown up in the church and left. We go to the Parliament of World Religions. So that's one aspect. The other is we try to train Christians in how to talk with non-believers. What do they believe? Why do they believe it? How do you interact with them? So it is apologetics. And Norm Geisler was a mentor and a very good friend. So we have a connection there. I'm also the current president of, a charter member of the International Society of Christian Apologetics, and the current president of Evangelical Ministries to Non-Christian Religions. So I stay a little busy.
It sounds like you got your a lot of pots. Are you juggling pots, putting your fingers in lots of pies? I don't know. I get my metaphors.
No, I have like a really big fryer, and they're all going at once.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Georgia, so I can definitely relate to a fryer. I didn't know that you could cook food without grease until I was in college.
You can cook food without grease?
Oh, so you're still in the South then somewhere. So Don, were you always a Christian? Did you become a Christian later?
In fact, I was just telling someone about that and on our podcast earlier today. my father was an atheist, not a philosophical atheist. He just didn't like God,
Mm.
and he didn't like the idea of morals, and so not believing in God was helpful to him. My mother was um, a New Ager before there was such a thing as a New Ager. Her favorite author was Edgar Casey. She went and got her fortune told, that sort of thing. And so I grew up in sort of an eclectic household, believed that the Darwinian views were true. And I met a young lady when at the age of 15. She shouldn't have dated me. She did. I'm glad she did. She was a Christian. Um, we went on to become engaged. She shouldn't have become engaged at all with me,
Mm.
but she did, and I'm really glad. We married 3 days after I turned 18. And she definitely shouldn't have married me. I'm glad she did because she was a Christian. I definitely was not.
Mm.
3 years later, we had our son, and she woke up in the hospital with two big questions. One was, they can they really be sending this child home with me? I don't know anything about raising kids, so that terrified her. The second is, what am I going to tell him about God? All of a sudden, this became very important, and so she kind of challenged God. Ended up reading some material, rededicating her life to Christ, and said, I'm married to an atheist. What am I going to do with that? And so she asked me if I would read some material. And I wanted to say no, but after being with her for 6 years, one thing I knew about Joy is if she wants something really badly, it's easier just to give in early because she's going to get it anyway. And so I agreed and I started reading the material and I realized fairly soon I couldn't be honest and an atheist because it's a claim to know something I can't actually know. I can't know that God doesn't exist somewhere or at some time. And so my next thing was to examine the Bible. I didn't really know anything about any other religions, but I knew some Christians, even though I didn't think they really could make a defense of their faith. But so I looked at that and discovered, to my surprise, that it is fundamentally reliable. Maybe not inerrant, but fundamentally reliable. The text we have is very 99% accurate to what was originally penned. That was pretty interesting, but it didn't mean inspired. And so, as I did a little more reading and understanding, I came to the realization that there's this little Jewish rabbi. I don't know how tall he was, but a Jewish rabbi in the first century by the name of Jesus who made an amazing claim that he would die, that he would raise himself from the dead, and then he was killed, and in fact was raised from the dead. And there's strong evidence for that. So I became a believer with that. Um, it didn't mean inspiration, but because of his claims and because it was true, it seemed I would be best served to go with the guy who said he would be raised from the dead, was raised from the dead, rather than the guy who said there's no such thing as a resurrection. And so that's how I became a Christian.
So how did you get into kind of the apologetics ministry? And for the viewers who don't know, apologetics means to give an answer or a defense. So there's apologists for the Democrat Party and the Republican Party in America. There's apologists for Islam. It just means that you're defending a viewpoint. So
Right.
how did you become an apologist for Christianity?
Well, again, it was the wife God gave me. It's her fault. He, I was happy now as a Christian, growing in the faith, and I was in construction. I was in construction. I was in construction for 40 years. My goal was to become a rich general contractor and support missionaries at that point. I never intended to be one. In fact, Joy's grandfather, it's kind of a fun part of the story, had prayed for me for 6 years that I would become a believer and that I would become a preacher.
Mm.
And so after I became a believer, he showed up to the next family gathering with a box of Bibles and commentaries and such because I would need these tools for being in the ministry. And as Joy thought about it, she said, I can't be a pastor's wife. I don't do flannel graph. I don't play piano. Uh, but she does bowl, loves bowling. We both bowled. We bowled on 2 leagues and we practiced twice a week. We loved bowling. And she joined a women's scratch league they called the Hot Tomatoes. And there were Jehovah's Witnesses on the league.
Ah,
This is new because the Watchtower had made a false prophecy about the world ending in 75. It didn't happen. So by the late 1970s, they were leaving, and the Watchtower opened up for them to get socially involved a little bit in hopes of keeping them in the organization. So she met these women. They were delightful. They were funny. They great wives, great mothers. And she came home. She said, "I need to understand more about what they believe because I don't really understand it. I know what they believe is weird, but I don't know what it is. Could you help me?" Now remember, if Joy wants something badly, it is easier to give in early because she's going to get it anyway. And so I said, "Okay, I will help you." We went to our pastor. Fine pastor, good Bible teacher. Ask him about Jehovah's Witnesses. He didn't know anything.
Mm.
He gave us a little tract with a lot of Bible verses on it. Might have been really helpful if we'd have known what the Bible verses were about, but there was no education there. So we started buying books. There were only 4 available at the time. They were helpful, but mean spirited. So you couldn't really give them to anybody.
right.
And then and then she heard about recorded helplines. This is interesting for me because I thought this is going to be helpful to us because it'll keep her busy, and I can keep doing what I'm doing. She opened a pre-recorded helpline. She had to write a 5-minute little message, changed it every Saturday. We advertised it, never answered it, so that people could call and listen to the message and hang up. Most calls are after 10 o'clock at night because they don't want to get caught by their families calling,
Mm.
right? This has to all be done on a QT. And then over time, several around the country had open lines. And so we said, well, we need to make ours a live line. What if someone wants to talk to someone right now? And so we made ours a live line and they all referred to ours. In 1989, John Ankerberg did a show called 105 Years of Watchtower Service with 4 former Jehovah's Witness women.
Mm.
And they talked about a conference that they have uh, every year in Pennsylvania. It was Joan Setnar, Lori McGregor, Gene Eason, and the last one, Helen Ortega. And so we made an adventure drive in 1990 to that conference and met a number of them. So now we're more engaged as just reaching Jehovah's Witnesses. Still wasn't a ministry yet.
Mm.
But because of the helpline, we started getting phone calls about other groups. And
Mm.
so Joy said, okay, dear, I'll do Jehovah's Witnesses and you do everybody else.
Everybody else. She'll take the big topic. You get the little one.
Yeah, exactly. And so we were discipling others into it. And then in 1995, we started Midwest Christian Outreach, incorporated it. Still didn't plan on being a full-time ministry, but at least it gave people uh, a source that they could feel confident in contacting for assistance. So that's how we got started in that. And then I had met Dr. Geisler in 1992, actually, because he was doing a battle over the resurrection with Murray Harris. And a mutual friend called me to see if I would go to an event with Dr. Geisler to handle his table because I understood his issues of the resurrection better than most people he knew of. So that's how we met and became steadfast friends for the rest of his life. So
yeah, of course, he was a mentor for me, and I work at Norm Geisler Ministries. So we all miss him. He was a giant in the field.
Oh, yeah.
Marcia,
Yeah.
some viewers may not have watched the last episode, so maybe you could give them a little rundown about your background and about how you became a Christian, if you don't mind covering ground again, because this is
Oh, no.
a new show and perhaps a new audience will see.
Okay, sure. Yes, well, I was raised by being taken to churches by my mother. My father was an agnostic, but we lived a lot overseas. So the churches we went to were kind of different from the churches that people know in the United States. One was, an army chapel. and one was a French church, French Protestant church. And then we came back to the United States, and I got involved with a Baptist church. And I went to Sunday school and everything. And I think that I thought I was a Christian because I went to church, but I honestly did not know. If you had asked me, what is the gospel? I would have said, what do you mean by the gospel? I wouldn't have known how to answer that question. I didn't understand why Jesus died on the cross, even though I heard about it. Nothing made sense. And I started, doubting Christianity as being a path I should follow. So I wanted to explore other things. And that led eventually to me getting very interested in the supernatural, actually, first. Other religions and the supernatural, really. I had some experiences that convinced me of a spiritual world. And so I continued exploring that, especially after school, eventually getting involved in various things, like I was interested in contact with the dead. I was interested in astrology. I was interested in Hinduism and then Buddhism. So I was exploring several different things related to what we call the New Age, and eventually became a professional astrologer. And so when I was an astrologer, and this was after already becoming involved with Buddhism for a number of years, I had clients. I taught astrology. I wrote for astrological and New Age journals. And I was very, very heavily involved. I believed that Jesus was a spiritual master like Buddha, on the same level as Buddha or other spiritual masters, and that God was an energy that we were all a part of and we would all go back to. And I believed in reincarnation completely and had quote unquote memories of past lives. So that's where I was. And God intervened in my life in a very unusual way, where I had a desire to go to a church, a compulsion, which I resisted for several months, and then finally gave into it, went to a church, experienced God's love. It was like a waterfall of love falling on me in this church. I didn't understand what this meant at all, and I was continuing or trying to continue in astrology, but I also was getting, after that, these impressions that God didn't like astrology and wanted me to give it up. And so I finally did give it up, and I still wasn't a Christian when I did that. And I was in a very strange kind of limbo where I wasn't an astrologer and I wasn't a Christian. And I didn't know what was going on. But I started reading the Bible, and it was a few weeks after that, while I was reading a passage in Matthew 8, that God opened my eyes, and I saw who the real Jesus really is. And I understood at that moment what he died on the cross, and that I needed Christ. And so at that moment, I gave my life to Christ, and I was completely changed. I knew that I was a new person. I found out a few months later that a young man in an office where I was working part-time, actually to give the boss of that office astrological advice on the employees, which is a whole other story in itself, because this young man happened to be in that office. And this man who hired me to give him astrology information was one of my clients and was also a student in my astrology class. And he wanted me there for astrology. And there was this young Christian man who worked there, and I found out he and his young adult group had been praying for me all during that year. And so that's kind of a short story of it. But, after that, of course, my life completely changed. And eventually people started asking me to give my testimony. And then a few years later, I was talking to youth groups, and then I was giving my testimony and talking about the New Age at my church and other churches. And eventually that led to going to conferences. That's where I met Don Veinot. I met Don and Joy Veinot at a conference. I think it was in St. Louis when I first met you, Don.
It might have been, yeah.
I think it was in St. Louis at the PFO conference, but I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Yeah.
And so it was somewhere, one of those conferences. And so that led to full-time ministry. So I went full-time in 1998, and I'm still in full-time ministry. I have supporting churches and supporting individuals. And that's how the Lord has sustained me and kept this ministry going. So I'm very grateful for that. Christian Answers for the New Age. So that's the name of my ministry. I should say that.
Absolutely. We want to make sure people get the word out there. Excellent. Well, it's good to hear both your stories. Mine isn't that dissimilar from Don's as far as being raised in a household with an absent father. He died when I was young, and then a mother who didn't want anything to do with religion. And so I became saved when I was 16. Long story, but basically got into apologetics because God pretty much put me down on my face and said, "You will be doing apologetics." And yeah, it can be intimidating to get a message from God sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not always Hallmark blonde, long-haired lady angels floating around. It's sometimes it's much rougher than that. And of course, it was exactly what I needed. Anyway, let's get to the main thing we're talking about. You guys wrote a book called Richard Rohr and the Enneagram Secret. There's a secret Enneagram. I thought.
Well, no, it's a secret about the Enneagram. That's what.
Oh, it's a secret you guys know.
Yeah, I'll let Don answer that question because I think he came up with the title.
What prompted you to write that book, Don? And since you came up with the title,
well, I have to tell you, writing books is not my favoriteest thing to do in the whole world. It's time consuming and all of that. But the story, actually, the history of it is this. In 1992, I met an individual who's Roman Catholic Jesuit who we became friends with by the name of Mitch Pacwa. And in fact, we ran into him at the Parliament of the World's Religions in 1993 and had a little fun with him. Well, he wrote a book on Catholics in the New Age, the Enneagram, psychology, and other things like that. So he handed us a book. We read it. We thought he had 2 chapters on the Enneagram in it. We thought, this is really weird stuff. I'm glad we will never have to deal with it in the evangelical church. It's mostly for mystics and Catholics, in my opinion.
Right.
He had been trained in it, and in fact was the one who trained Mitch Pacwa. Richard Rohr. So, but after a couple of years of tinkering with it, he discovered that even though they tell him that whatever your number is always your number. And as he would take the test periodically, he would have a different number, which bothered him. And so he started researching it and discovered that it's occultic and has an occultic history. And so he wrote the book really to warn Catholics. So that was 93. We didn't think much more about it. We went on our merry way. And then in the early part of the 3rd millennium, the emerging church is emerging from the church. And they came in contact with someone who became sort of the resident theologian for the emergence by the name of Richard Rohr. Now, he was a contemplative at the time. Didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about the Enneagram, really. I didn't know, because I didn't know anything about the Enneagram. I didn't know he was affiliated with it in any way. I knew that his theology was wearing off on them because you would see it in Brian McLaren's writings and Rob Bell's writings and others' writings. Aaron Nyquist, who became left the Rob Bell's church and became the worship leader at Willow Creek Community Church. One of the first things he did was to post on his personal page how Richard Rohr had transformed his understanding of Christianity. And then I had to figure out, well, what does that mean? Well, it means everything that we now know what it means. It means it's not Christianity.
That sounds
Right.
like the early heresy, the Gnostic churches, where those leaders of those churches had Gnostic. The word comes from the Greek word gnosko, which means knowledge. Those
Yeah.
leaders had secret knowledge, which would transform the meaning of the scriptures. So that sounds
Right.
very. So this is not a new. This is not a new thing within the church.
No, it totally isn't. And I often have to tell people as we were teaching on the Bible that nearly every one of the New Testament books, with the exception of Philemon, was written to refute heresy, expose false teachers, and bad behavior, to lay down proper doctrine and good behavior. Those five things. And you see that in John. He starts out, he's refuting two heresies: the Ebionites, who denied the pre-existence of Christ, and the Docetists, who denied the physicality of Christ. And almost every story in his gospel is to um, buttress up his argument that he is fully God, he pre-existed, and he was fully human. He's physical.
Mhm.
It's
Mm.
interesting stuff. So that was early in the around 2003 or four. Then in 2007, Willow Creek did this "we were wrong" statement, and we started getting calls. Are they going to start teaching the Bible? And I said, we'll have to see. Don't know. Well, the next thing they did was the Ancient Future Conference, headlined by Ruth Haley Barton and others, contemplatives. Who's big on contemplative that all of them are connected to? Richard Rohr. So here's the guy again, Richard Rohr. Again, I'm thinking it's not really going to come into the evangelical church, so we don't have to pay that much attention to that. But watch the contemplative stuff. And Marcia was writing on it. In fact, she did an article, I think, in 2011 on the Enneagram. She's writing on contemplative. We're dealing with other things. So all of that happened through that period of time.
Well, just
We,
if I can interrupt you just for a moment, a lot of
yeah.
the audience is not going to know what contemplative means. Could
Okay.
you kind of explain that a little bit?
I can. I wish Marcia was here because she's like the expert.
Well, okay. Well, if you want, I can ask her. Marcia, you still here? Did you disappear? Can we bring her back? Okay, maybe she's taking an early break.
No, no.
Oh, there you are. You're back.
I was there the whole time, and I'm going, can you hear me? And when
Oh,
Don said I wish Marcia was
you
here, I
got
thought he was joking.
Okay.
I'm
I
like,
just
"Yeah,
want you to be the contemplative person.
okay, I'll be the contemplative. I don't know what happened. I have no idea.
it's all technical.
It's okay. Just
I
just
can
go
see
for
and
it,
hear
girl.
you
You're
We're on
fine.
the internet, and you ought to know ahead of time
I
everything's not
know,
going to
I
work.
know. You never know what's going to happen.
So,
Well,
what
yeah,
does contemplative
the
mean?
contemplative is, I call it a movement. I also call it contemplative spirituality. This is something I first started investigating in the late 1990s. And I can't remember what spurred me to do this, but I came across Thomas Keating, and he was a monk, and he along with two other monks, Basil Pennington and William Menninger, they were Trappist monks. They started a movement where they were teaching what they called centering prayer. And this was at the time more, it was influencing more maybe some people in the Catholic Church, although they were never officially endorsed by, like the head of the Catholic Church of the Vatican never officially endorsed them. But they were influencing people, and they were influencing the progressives or the emergents. So I started reading their books, and then I noticed a lot of parallels with what was happening in the church with Richard Foster, especially. And eventually, I wrote an article in 2005 about contemplative prayer, and exposing it for what it was, that it was not true contemplation or true prayer. Basically, this is mysticism. That is what we're talking about, because they draw from the mystics, from medieval times up to modern mystics. They draw from a book called The Cloud of Unknowing, which I read. It took me 2 years, but I read it.
Wow.
It's a 14th century anonymous book they think was written by a monk. And so I read that, and other material. And it's also influenced by Eastern religious practices because Thomas Keating and his two colleagues felt that Buddhist and Hindu um, monks or Buddhist and Hindu meditators had a sort of secret to meditating that Christians were missing out on. And so they actually taught some monks these techniques, which are very similar to the Eastern meditation I did. And that's one reason it caught my interest, is because when they were describing what they did, I was thinking, well, this is exactly what I did when I did Hindu and Buddhist meditation when I was in the New Age. So I started writing about it more. And then the Enneagram hit with The Road Back to You in 2016, which is the book that got it into the evangelical church. And so I had already been warning about Richard Rohr in 2013 and the Enneagram starting in 2014. And, but I really stepped up my warnings in 2016 after The Road Back to You came out by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile. By the way, Suzanne Stabile was mentored by Richard Rohr. And Ian Cron is a very close associate of Richard Rohr, and they both teach at the what's called the Living School at Richard Rohr's Center in Albuquerque. So there's very close ties there. So you have the Enneagram coming in, and I think what's hard to explain here is that there's sort of a convergence with the Enneagram and the progressives or emergent church, Richard Rohr, and the contemplatives. They're all kind of tied together, although in our book, I don't recall, but I don't think we talk about the contemplative aspect. We focused on the Enneagram. But I've noticed that there's a lot of times in churches that are teaching the Enneagram, they're also teaching contemplative spirituality, or they're open to it. So a lot of times you find these things together. And so once that book came out, it exploded in the church. And I was posting like crazy. I mean, like really like a mad woman on Facebook. And I started writing a few articles from my website, and people kept saying, Marcia, why do you keep talking about this Enneagram? And I said, because it's getting popular, and there are more books coming out after 2017, more books came out. And I said, once people recognize that this is invalid and it's a New Age tool and it comes from the occult and the New Age, then I'll stop warning. But that never happened. It just kept on, getting popular. And Don knew, of course, saw all this going on. And he said, we really need to do something. And so initially he, or somebody thought of doing an open letter. But then Don decided the best way would be to do a book, which we could put in people's hands.
Right,
so they had something concrete.
Right. Over the next 4 years, basically, 2016, you had InterVarsity came out with their book, which sold over 1 million copies.
Yeah.
2017, you had, let me think about this.
The Sacred Enneagram.
Yeah, Thomas Nelson.
No. Yeah. Oh, I don't know if it was Nelson. Was it Zonder? I think it was Zondervan. It was Zondervan.
Zondervan was 2017.
Yeah.
2018, IVP came out with their second Enneagram book. 2019, Thomas Nelson got in the act with a 9-volume set. And we said, okay, we're writing articles, we're warning people, we're doing, Marcia and I and a couple of others, trying to raise the bar on this. We sent letters to all of the publishers. Mostly they just kind of scoffed at it.
Yeah.
It was now going into colleges where they're teaching it as for certification in Bible colleges. And we went, okay, we need to do a book. We need to do something they can hand somebody else physical other than an assortment of articles. And that's why we did the book.
Wow. Well, I know that there's a book right now there's many books on Amazon on the Enneagram. Thankfully, yours is there. The one that really concerns me is one called The Enneagram for Beginners, a Christian guide to understanding your type for a God-centered life.
Yeah.
These things, I got more. We got a lot more to talk about on this, but we're going to take a break right now. This is Don Deal with Don Veinot and Marcia Montenegro. We're discussing the Enneagram here on Spiritual Warfare, the New Age today on ABNSAT's Trinity Channel. We're going to take a brief break, so please watch the commercials, consider supporting ABNSAT, and we'll see everybody on the other side of the break in just about 2 minutes. Thank you.
You are watching Trinity Channel. You are watching Trinity Channel.
What I meant was 2 minutes or less. That's what I meant to say at the break. I'm Don Deal, Director of Classical Apologetics at Norm Geisler International Ministries. We're here today on ABNSAT's Trinity Channel on the program Spiritual Warfare. Today's topic's the New Age, and specifically the Enneagram we're talking about. We did the show last month with Marcia talking about the Enneagram, but there's so much more going on than most people realize. We had to bring her back, and thank you for coming back, Marcia.
Oh, thank you.
And she said, well, if you can have me back, you should have my padre, Don Veinot, come back with me also. Don, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show and what you've discussed so far as your personal journey and also how you got into discussing this. Let me ask you this one, Don. In the book, you guys have a section called Enneagram 101, where you walk people through that. For listeners who, like the title of the book I read just before the break, they've only heard it described as a Christian personality tool. Can you briefly explain, and briefly, I mean, we got about an hour left of the show, what the Enneagram actually claims to be and why you called the book a secret? So, What is the Enneagram?
The true Enneagram adherents, Richard Rohr and others, are very clear that the Enneagram, the numbers, are your path back to God, that you have never been separated from God, that you invented a false self that believes you're separated from God, and the Enneagram path is the one that gets you back to the realization that you are, in fact, with God, have always been with God, and have never been separated from Him. That is your false self. Now you can come back to your true self. That's what the Enneagram is all about.
Yeah, that's what it really is.
Right? It has been kind of sold as the bill of goods as a personality profile. It wasn't intended to be that ever. That's just a sales pitch.
So it's a different religious concept clothed in Christian verbiage.
Yes. Absolutely.
And
marketed by Christian publishers.
Oh, as I read that title just a moment ago, and I mentioned last time that even a large church like Andy Stanley's in Atlanta area use the Enneagram within their staff and within their training. They're big advocates of it, and I would like to say that's the only issue I have with what gets taught there, but we're not on this show to bash on Andy today. I disagree with a lot of stuff he says, but I'm not going to call the police on him or anything. Well, let me ask you this, Marcia. The popular view is that the Enneagram has ancient Christian roots, that it started in monasticism or something along that line. what are the real historical roots, and how's that different from what Richard Rohr and the others say about it?
Well, yes, it doesn't have any Christian roots. A lot of people try to say it came from Evagrius Ponticus, who was like in the 4th century, or it came from Ramon Lull, who was a monk, I think, in the 12th century. And he did draw some diagrams, but he didn't draw the Enneagram. He was drawing diagrams to illustrate the Trinity because he was in Spain, and at the time, the Muslims were in Spain, and he wanted to show them the Trinity, basically. And so the existence of the Enneagram did not, the form of it, the way we see it today, and having any meaning to it, didn't exist till 1916. But all the first Christian books that came out were all asserting that it had these Christian origins, or they would say, well, the origin of the Enneagram is murky, but, and then they would try to give, we think that, the church fathers knew about it or something like that. They would try to give it some credibility as having started. Some of them did say, well, it may not have had Christian origins, but it's a tool that can still be used by Christians. So that's what they were saying more later, when it became very hard to defend the view that it had Christian origins, because historically you can't show that at all. And so it really began in 1916 with George Gurdjieff, who was this esoteric teacher who had followers, but he taught the Enneagram as this tool that basically revealed the secrets of the universe, the cosmic laws. He thought that it illustrated the music of the universe. He felt that there was these vibrations or waves, maybe not vibrations, but these waves, this cosmic dance going on. And he actually choreographed dances that illustrate what he believed was going on. And
you can see them on YouTube today.
Yeah, you can go look. If you do a search on YouTube for George Gurdjieff dances, you'll find quite a few, because there are still people who follow his teachings, and they do these they're kind of strange dances. It's not like a normal dance. It's certain movements, and supposedly they're aligning with the movements of the universe. And he felt that the Enneagram illustrated this, that he had captured that, and he had captured the secret of all these different numerological secrets as well. I mean, it's very, very complicated, which is always true with the occult. I mean, this is really an occult tool. It's very complex and has all these layers of meaning to it, just like astrology. That's one reason I understood the Enneagram and what it was and why people were believing it, because it works the same way as astrology. So now I do believe that Richard Rohr wrote a book in 1991, right, Don Veinot, on the Enneagram. He and I can't remember the other guy's name. He was a Lutheran. Wrote a book, The Enneagram: A Christian Perspective. And I think it was first written in German, and then it was published in English, translated into English. And I think he said in there initially that it didn't have Christian origins.
He did. He was very clearly stated in that book.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that changed. It's really weird how that completely went away and it changed. And so it became this complete mess of confusion, where people were saying one thing and other people were saying another thing. But everybody was trying to make it at least in the church, and Christian Enneagram teachers were trying to make it look like it was Christian. And Beth McCord started this whole kind of enterprise where she calls herself an Enneagram coach, and she trains other coaches, other Christians, to be Enneagram coaches. And she said she taught the Enneagram from a Christ-centered perspective. Well, that's like saying, I'm going to bring astrology into the church and I'm going to teach it from a Christ-centered perspective. And so she basically knew the background, because I listened to some podcasts she did, and she knew about the Oscar Ichazo and Claudia Naranjo two of the non-Christians who helped develop the Enneagram after George Gurdjieff into a tool to look at who you are, although they weren't talking about it as a personality test. It was more about uncovering the false self to discover the true self, which is how it's used in the New Age. And I was familiar with it when I was in the New Age. I wasn't real familiar with it, but I knew about it. And so she basically tried to turn it into a Christ-centered tool. And I actually heard people and had people comment on Facebook when I posted on it saying, oh, well, she doesn't use it the way New Agers use it. She's using it for a Christian purpose. And that's where it gets where you have to explain how you cannot take the Enneagram and turn it into a Christian tool. And so that requires you can't say that in one or two sentences. So the more complicated something is and the more layers of deception around it, the longer it takes to kind of, peel away those layers and show people what's really going on. So it was always a complicated discussion.
The essence of why this is a secret, because there's all of this stuff
right.
that they're unaware of. They're sold this idea that it's a Christian tool.
Right.
From him. There was an intermediate guy whose name I don't recall at the moment, but he tried to tie it to astrology, to the movement of the cosmos. From there, it goes to Oscar Chazo. Oscar Chazo was an occultist.
Yeah.
And he started his own little occult group in South America. Now, and he claims that he had a 7-day experience with Metatron, some being named Metatron. And through these experiences and encounters, he was given the numbers of the Enneagram. He used it to some degree, but he didn't really develop it. But it clearly was from the occult and channeled to him by some means. He passed it on to a guy named Claudio Naranjo, who was a psychiatrist, who is also engaged in ayahuasca, which is a natural growing pharmaceutical, if you will. Well, and he could take that to, he could use that to get in contact with the universe and those kinds of things. And through automatic writing, which is, occult. He got the Enneagram types, the exact types. And he lays that out. Well, as we presented that, because we have a video of him making that statement.
Yeah.
And some of the Enneagram proponents kind of ran for the hills to say, well, he didn't really mean automatic writing. He really meant he was just musing and remembering things he had learned.
Stream of consciousness.
Stream of consciousness.
Yeah, there's a Tyler Zach, who was a pastor and is one of the biggest Enneagram proponents in the church. I mean, I name names. So Tyler Zach is his name, because I started posting on him before he did this video. And he did a video because he was accepting the Enneagram and wanting to train pastors. And he did a video trying to explain what Claudio Naranjo said, and said that Claudio Naranjo wasn't talking about spirit guides when he said higher spiritual authorities. He was talking about experts in psychology that he had learned from. But if you listen to what Claudio Naranjo says, there is no way you come away with that kind of interpretation. It's clearly a spiritual, he's talking about, getting something from another dimension. I mean, that's so clear.
Yeah. Just a basic research you can do on George Gurdjieff is, besides him coming up with the Enneagram, his students said that he was only focused on money, and that he spent money out of control, and that he fathered many children over with different women that he used from his position of authority. And that he ended up having fights with all his closest followers, and everybody ended up breaking apart because of his erratic behavior. If that's the person you're using to determine how you should approach yourself and your relationship with God, I think at the very root of the tree, I think there's a problem there.
Right.
Yeah.
Clearly not. What was it? What was it proposed to? What do they say? One of the early church fathers or the monastic movement or whatever. Where do they say it came from?
Oh,
The Enneagram? Oh,
their claim is it came out of the monastic movement, the Desert Fathers and so forth.
So how
yeah,
did,
the Desert Fathers. Yeah, a lot of them say Russell Moore embraces the Enneagram. He had Ian Cron on his show, and Ian Cron's sitting there going, well, the Desert Fathers, use the Enneagram. And Russell Moore's just sitting there nodding his head. Oh, yeah, really? I mean, people just accept this. It is just absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, this is still going on. It's just
Right.
mind-boggling.
so how did Richard Rohr get to be so well known and promote this so well? I mean,
Well, okay. Again, it was a
priest,
process.
right?
It was a process. He picked it up from, like I said, Mitch Pacwa, who picked it up from another Roman Catholic, and then Mitch Pacwa bowed out of the whole thing. Richard Rohr, in the meantime, kept dabbling with it, and he had a friend who was a psychic. Why is her name's out of my brain?
Ellen
Right?
Palmer.
Yeah, Ellen Palmer. And they were both kind of tinkering with this thing. And then he started training others in it, like, say the authors of the first book again, Ian Cron and
Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile.
Suzanne Stabile. Suzanne Stabile, we're not going to get into her history here, but
We may.
no, we won't, because what I know by hearsay, so I want to
Okay.
always be careful with that.
Okay.
But she and her husband became engaged with Richard Rohr, and she was essentially discipled by Richard Rohr.
Yeah, she was. She was mentored. She admits it in an interview she did. She admitted to being mentored. Richard Rohr mentored her and her husband for, I think, several years. And she learned the Enneagram from Richard Rohr. And I wanted to mention one little missing piece here in the history with Richard Rohr getting it. When Claudio Naranjo, who we mentioned how his focus, what he did was he studied the effects of mind-altering drugs, psychedelics,
Right.
on the brain. That was his interest. And he went to California and was teaching at the now I need help with my memory. Esalen, that's the name of it.
Right, Esalen,
Yeah,
right.
Esalen, the
Institute.
California.
Institute, considered the birthplace of the human potential movement, but also a lot of New Age teachers came out of the Esalen Institute, and it's actually very New Age right now. So he was teaching the Enneagram there, and one of his students was a Catholic named Bob Oakes, Ochs, and Bob Oakes took the Enneagram teaching back to a Catholic seminary, Loyola, I think, seminary in Chicago. And we think Richard Rohr learned it there. Probably, I think Don said Mitch Pacwa.
Yes.
But
yes.
it was this connection with Bob Oakes, this Catholic. I think he was I don't know if he's a priest or a monk, I can't remember, but he went back and took it to Chicago. So there were two paths. One went to Chicago via the Catholic, Catholics who got into it. And the other path was through Helen Palmer, the psychic, who took it into the New Age. And she started, once she started writing about it, she started teaching other people. And then it spread like wildfire in the New Age because it's such a New Age tool. It's just perfect for New Agers because it has there's no standard for anything in the Enneagram, and you can put in what you want to. And so it just spread like wildfire. She trained people who trained people, and all these different New Agers started teaching it. And let me just point out real quickly that Beth McCord, who I mentioned earlier, who said she taught a gospel-centered or Christ-centered Enneagram, she had 6 New Age teachers, because I noticed that she said she learned the Enneagram 15 years ago. Well, this was a statement she made like back in 1920 or something, 2020. And so I knew if she learned it 15 years ago from that, 15 years prior, she couldn't have learned it from any Christians. There weren't any, maybe some Catholics maybe knew enough about it then, but So I looked up, I found out the names of her teachers and looked at all of them. A couple of them I knew, they were all New Agers. And so I did a Facebook post that Beth McCord had 6 New Age teachers, and I named them, and I had screenshots from her website where she names them. She actually names them. Of course, she doesn't call them New Agers. And you know that completely was taken off her website in less than a year.
Wow.
So and then I did another Facebook post. Beth McCord removed all the names of her New Age teachers. Why did she do this? I wonder.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you see
Duh.
what's going on. This is talk about the New Age getting into the church. It was such a clear assault from what I was seeing and what Don was seeing. And but yet people found it hard to believe it because, you know, they knew some Christians who were doing it, or they knew pastors who said it was okay. And then here comes, you know, me and Don, who, you know, we aren't, by most people, we aren't known. Nobody knows who we are. I mean, you know, not really. And so they're like, well, who are these people saying the Enneagram is New Age and occultic? You know, and so a lot of people would just say, oh, Marcia doesn't know what she's talking about. And it was a real battle. It was a real battle.
I can't imagine. You know, the worst thing is for me is even the scientific community has turned on it. I mean, the idea that it's scientific. I'll give you 4 things. The reason why the scientific community turns back on it: lack of empirical validity. You can't do peer-reviewed studies that demonstrate this. And this reminds me so much of a book I read part of before I got frustrated called Dianetics from L. Ron Hubbard. You know, when Scientific American reviewed Dianetics, they said, in the history of printing, no book has contained more claims and less evidence. By the way, that's not a positive review on Dianetics.
Not
Yeah,
really.
and you read it, and he says studies invariably show, and he never linked studies or anything. He just take it. So it's the same type idea. So it lacks empirical validity. It pigeonholes people as if everybody is always the exact same personality all the time.
Yeah,
I know there's days when I'm grouchy, or as my son called me when he was 2, he says, "Daddy's scrouchy today." I know there's days when I'm joyful, and days when I'm happy and laughing, and days when I'm serious and working hard. And which day are you gonna do it on? When I went for my airline pilot interviews, I was told that when they ask psychological questions, always remember that day when you were really excited to work and happy, and then answer it that way. In other words, emphasize that aspect of your personality, not the ones they might not like.
Yeah, because the Enneagram claims, you know, once you discover which type you are, and then they link it like there's another type across from that type that would be something that strengthens you, and another one that weakens you, etc. And you know, as all things in occultic are, they get more and more complicated. And they came up with dividing it in 3 different areas and all of that stuff. Well, they say this is your type. And that is so wrong because people change. People's personality changes.
Depending on who you're with, your environment.
And a lot depends on that too. So to try to pigeonhole yourself in this category, plus it's false. And we cited in our book a Christian psychologist, Don, give me his name.
Jay Medenwalt.
Right, Jay Medenwalt, because he has, and even since our book, done some tests on, he evaluated a test that's on.
Right, there are scientific evaluations for profile testing like this.
Yeah,
that demonstrates that they are accurate test scientifically versus others that are just cosmopolitan kind of made up stuff.
Yeah, it's called the psychometric test.
Psychometric test.
Yeah, there's also the people who studied it for the scientific world said it also exhibits the Barnum effect.
Yes.
Right.
When the Barnum effect, for those who don't know, is that you'll hear things that are vague and non-specific, and they'll say, "Is this you?" And they'll go, "That's exactly me." but
Yeah.
it's vague, and you focus on yourself and you apply it that way. And it reminds me of the story I told last time, where the psychology professor told all the students that he had they had their charts done for each student, and
Oh,
their
yeah.
personalities determined, and they had them read it and rate it on 1 to 10. How closely is this correct about you? And they all gave it a 9 or a 10. And he said, now pass it to the person behind you. And it was all the exact same vague wording. It's the
Right.
Barnum effect, where
That
people,
was, I think that was done with astrology.
it was astrology,
It was a
specifically what that
professor
was
who
about.
passed horoscopes out to everybody based on their birth date, and like something like 95% of the students said, yeah, it's accurate, and then they passed it around, and they all had the same thing. So yeah, that's the Barnum effect. There's the confirmation bias.
Yeah.
There's several. In fact, Jay Medenwalt had, I guess it's still online, he had a 2-part article on the Enneagram, and the second part of it, he names all the different reasons why the Enneagram is believable. And you know what? They're the exact same reasons that make astrology believable.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
At the same
They're
time,
exactly the same.
Yeah.
So,
People wanting answers, people wanting to hear about themselves, focus on themselves. Yeah. Well, I'm going to interrupt you. I apologize for that, but it's about time for a break again. This will be the final break. When we come back, I'm Don Deal, and this show is Spiritual Warfare. We're discussing the Enneagram today with Marcia Montenegro of Canna and Don Veinot of MCOI. And we're going to take a brief break, and we come back after the break. I'm going to ask them some really hard questions about the Enneagram. All right, so please join us after the break.
You are watching Trinity Channel.
Hi, I'm Don Deal, Director of Classical Apologetics at Norm Geisler International Ministries. Welcome back to ABNSAT's Trinity Channel. Today on our show, Spiritual Warfare, we're discussing the Enneagram, part of the New Age movement, with Marcia Montenegro of Canna. And Marcia, would you mind telling the audience again what Canna stands for?
Yes, it stands for Christian Answers for the New Age.
So if someone wants to know, if somebody's a Christian and they're saying, does this make sense? This sounds kind of new agey to me. Where do they go to get information?
Well, they can check out my website at christiananswersnewage.com and see if I address the issue there. Or they can contact me via the website or on Facebook. They can either contact me personally on my personal page, or I have a Facebook page called Christian Answers for the New Age, and they can send a message to me there. People can also post questions on my Facebook page, and which people often do. And so I'm very happy to try to answer any questions. If it's something that's not really New Age, and I do get that sometimes, I can usually direct them to a resource that addresses the issue they're asking about. Mm-hmm. So sometimes people put everything that they think is unbiblical under New Age. And it actually belongs somewhere else. And I can't investigate everything. So, I'm focused on the New Age and the occult. That's what I usually tell people. But I know a lot about other areas, and I know other ministries that deal with other areas like Don Veinot's, and so I'll direct them to articles or to those ministries. But I'm very open to questions. People are not bothering me. A lot of people say I hate to bother you, and I'm like, no, that's what I'm here for. I'm
Yeah.
here to answer questions, so you're not bothering me.
So Don, it says there MCOI. Why don't you tell the audience what that is and what you do there?
Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. We are a mission to cults and non-Christian religions and educators to the church on what's going on in culture and how to help their people engage with unbelievers.
Excellent. Well, so if I send you a message again in the future and say, "Hey Don, can we talk about Jehovah Witnesses?" you would say,
Absolutely. In fact, this week's blog is going to be on. You might enjoy this because there's always this debate going on about replacement theology.
mm-hmm.
And Jehovah's Witnesses have replacement theology because the you that goes door to door isn't the you that gets rewarded. You get replaced.
Oh, uh, okay. So, and Marcia, you do more than just the Enneagram. So I'm hoping that someday we can have
Oh
you
my
back.
goodness, yeah. Yeah, I could be on for several things: astrology, the contemplative movement, divination in general, like because I did numerology as well, and I had tarot cards. So there are aspects of the occult and then the new age. I do make a distinction, although they overlap a lot. I
Right.
do make a distinction in them, but yeah, I have several areas that I cover.
Excellent. I've now got you guys recorded on video saying that you'll come back.
Okay.
That takes some of the scheduling pressure off of me since
Sure. No, and no extra charge either. So
really
No,
I was going to pay you double
Yeah,
what I paid you this time.
$1 million for this program was enough.
Well, I took that out of my kids' college fund, so it's no big
Okay.
deal. Well, look, back to the topic at hand. I'll start with you this time, Marcia. Chapter 5 asks the question, which God does Richard Rohr serve?
Yes.
Which one does he serve? Is it not the Christian God? Isn't he a priest?
He's actually a friar
Oh,
in
friar?
the Franciscan order, which is part of the Roman Catholic Church. However, Richard Rohr is also he openly admits to adhering to perennial wisdom.
Mm.
And so I explored that with the help of Ron Huggins, Dr. Ron Huggins, who has taught at seminaries and actually helped us a bit with the history of the Enneagram for our book, and helped me for a lot of Facebook posts I did that involved history and also in perennial wisdom. So I explored that. I read a couple of books on it, and I have an article on it on my website. So basically, perennial wisdom is the view that originally there was one religion, and this religion was the truth, but it got divided up and became the basis for other religions. So all world religions are actually rooted in this one pure original religion. And even though they look different and their doctrines are different and their practices are different, they actually share the same truth as this original religion. And the way that you discover that truth is through an inward journey. You go on this inward journey, which involves the contemplative practices, of course. And this is why Richard Rohr is so big on contemplative practices and why his center is called the Center for Action and Contemplation. It's because he is very big on this. So it's mystical methods where you go inward and encounter true God and the true church and the true God, the truth, and the true self. So he talks a lot about the true self. The true self is the self that has never been separated from God, because he doesn't believe that sin separates us from God. And he believes that we have always been with God, always been a part of God, and we will become a part of God again. And so he doesn't believe, and he has said, Jesus did not die for sins on the cross. So he is clearly heretical on the atonement, and he's heretical on the nature of God and the nature of Christ. He teaches that Jesus and the Christ are distinct. So Jesus was the man born in Bethlehem, and who became Jesus the teacher, but he was a vehicle for the universal Christ. And so Richard Rohr started talking about this. Actually, the reason I got interested in him was in 2013 when I heard him interviewed by a priest on the topic of the cosmic Christ. And I thought, what is he talking about? And it was really confusing. I didn't know exactly what he meant. Who is this cosmic Christ? So I started, following Richard Rohr in the sense of watching interviews and talks that he did, and trying to understand this. And apparently it's the universal Christ. And he did write a book on that. And I have an article on that on my website where he makes it very clear. And so this universal Christ is actually had two incarnations. The first incarnation was creation.
The cosmos.
The cosmos. Jesus first incarnated as creation. His second incarnation was as Jesus. But then after the resurrection, there was a separation between Jesus and the universal Christ. And Jesus can point to the universal Christ, but that's who we're supposed to be looking at, the universal Christ, not at Jesus, except for maybe certain practical things, like his teachings. But the universal Christ, it's what's really mankind is supposed to be searching for, and looking up towards the universal Christ. So he makes a distinction between Jesus and Christ. That's heretical, of course, right there. And the incarnation is creation. He's an open panentheist, which means he's not a pantheist, but he's panentheism, which we talk about in our book, which is the idea that God is contained in creation and creation is contained in God. And so Richard Rohr teaches what he calls an embodied spirituality. This is why he's not a Gnostic. A lot of people think he's a Gnostic, but he's not completely a Gnostic, because the Gnostics made a distinction between matter and spirit. And Richard Rohr does not do that. He believes that matter contains spirit, that matter contains God. And so he believes in this embodied spirituality, and that all of us have the divine in us. We all have the divine in us, just like Jesus did. So this is his view. This is where he's coming from: panentheism and perennial wisdom, which sometimes sound like the New Age. And so that's why, another reason why a lot of people think Richard Rohr is a New Ager, but he's not a New Ager. And I actually think he doesn't like New Age ideas, but a lot of his ideas, the perennial ideas, overlap and sound like the New Age. So it's very confusing. Wow.
So, hey, Don?
Yes?
You guys talk about the Enneagram spread as kind of like a spiritual infection in the book. What do you see in terms of discipleship, gospel message, how people view sin and sanctification? Are those issues where the Enneagram has had a negative effect on the members of the church you
Absolutely. I'm going to give you an acronym that I came up with, 30 years ago. AIDS. The church has spiritual AIDS, AIDS. It is the acquired ignorance of the doctrines of Scripture. And it is a deadly virus. And it acts just like the physical virus, because since you no longer have protection, in this case, against spiritual errors, it becomes a deadly thing. So it spreads through the church because people are unaware. They're not inoculated against false teaching. So it spreads through what I would call the good old boy network. Now, you're from the South, you understand the good old boy network. Pastor Joe is over here. His church is growing. He's a good guy. You trust him. You go out hunting together or whatever. He's doing something that's really growing his congregation. You trust Pastor Joe because he's your friend. You start doing what he's doing without investigating it. And then you tell Pastor Jimmy down the road what Pastor Joe told you and how you're starting to use it, none of you have checked it out.
Mm.
The result is you now have heresy permeating your church because they in the church trust you and the leadership of the church
Mm.
to investigate these things. Now, we've had this happen a lot. This is not the first time. I really came up with this because of Bill Gothard, which we wrote about him, who got into the church, 2.5 million followers. He was well trusted by many, 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 many churches, and no one thought to question his views on grace, for example, which he insists is something you earn. That's a problem. And then the next instance was Gwen Shamblin and something called Way Down Workshop.
Mm-hmm.
How did that get into the church? Well, everyone thought it was a diet program. And, it's for women's ministry. And, women don't really need to check in. We don't need to check into what they're doing because women don't really care about theology. They just, want to do women stuff together. And so she's in the church and had 1 million followers. When we heard about her, she was in 30,000 churches across 60 denominations. Uh, and she denies the Trinity, the deity of Christ. Salvation is by works, mostly by losing weight because God hates fat people.
Mm.
And so in 2000, we did a little uh, press release. We thought, well, no one really cares about these kinds of things. They allow heresy run rampant in the churches, and certainly they did here. And so Christianity Today picked that up and called her to check what we had said in the press release, which is she doesn't believe the deity of Christ, the Trinity, the salvation by grace alone through faith alone. And she confirmed all that was true. And then she said the most amazing thing. She said, this is okay. This will pass. Women don't care about doctrine. They just want to lose weight. And I have to tell you something. Women around the country were unhappy with her saying that.
Yeah.
And in the matter of 3 weeks, she lost all but 500 of her followers. It was an amazing thing to happen.
Wow.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
all right. So because of that, we watch these trends happening and we try to alert people, but very few listen because they trust Pastor Joe, Pastor Bill, Pastor Fred, InterVarsity Press. No one thinks, should we actually look at this theologically, because they trust other people. And in defense of pastors, they have a hard job,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're trying to teach their congregations. They're trying to comfort those who are sick. They're doing all that kind of stuff. And they trust others who they believe are doing the vetting.
Mm-hmm.
They don't realize that their people in their churches are walking into this stuff, coming to them through other sources, unvetted. I have to tell you a secret. InterVarsity Press doesn't have anyone theologically vetting their books unless they're scholarly books. They don't, Zondervan Press doesn't have anyone theologically vetting their books. None of the quote Christian presses theologically vet their books. They assume the writers and authors know what they're talking about.
Right.
Unless they're scholarly works.
Trust the publishers. They were trusting these publishers. They said, well, if they're publishing books on the Enneagram, how could the Enneagram be wrong? Or they wouldn't publish books that were about something that was New Age. Well, yeah,
Right.
They would. Yeah,
Absolutely.
They would.
Well, Marcia, who cares where the Enneagram came from? God can redeem anything, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. That was a line I heard so many times. So I finally wrote an article on my website called "Can God Really Redeem Anything?" And the answer to that is a lot of people confuse the categories. God redeems people and God is going to redeem his creation, but he doesn't redeem things that are evil. He's not going to redeem astrology. He's not going to redeem the Ouija board. He's not going to redeem tarot cards or palm reading. And he doesn't redeem occult tools and occult concepts. Those are all evil. Those are things that are counterfeits and go against God.
Right.
God
right.
condemns things that are false. He doesn't use them. He doesn't redeem them. He condemns them.
Right. God redeems the prostitute. He doesn't redeem prostitution.
Right. And that's what Don was going to quote. I was going to say that and quote Don.
Well,
But he just said it because he's right here. So, and that's a very good point, because I get the same argument about the Magi who were following a star, and then people try to think there's something that's okay with astrology. And it's the problem with astrology is that New Agers or occultists have perverted it, but it's actually something from God. And so I point out what Don just said. God used those men who they did other things besides astrology, but God used people who do astrology. But that doesn't mean he condones astrology, because
Right.
God doesn't contradict himself, and he condemns astrology, which is a form of divination, and that's very clearly condemned, and it's explicitly condemned in some passages like Isaiah 47 and a few other places that are references to the worship of certain like planetary type gods. So, God isn't going to contradict himself and suddenly say, oh, yeah, astrology is really okay if you use it the right way. So, this idea that God can redeem anything, I think that's rooted in the belief, God can redeem anyone, which is true. God can redeem anybody. But redeeming a practice that's evil or a tool that's evil is not the same thing.
Right.
Well, your book, Don, has been it's eye opening. I know my pastor was on the show with Marcia last time, and he had never heard of the Enneagram. And when he asked one of our college students at our church about it, who goes to a Christian college, she goes, "Oh yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah.
It's a personality test." What practical? But she didn't. She hadn't done it, but she just had heard about it through her
Right.
friend.
Right.
Right.
So, I ask you, Don, what practical advice would you give to a church or small group that's already using the Enneagram? How should they respond to that, biblically, pastorally?
Well, we have choice. We always have choices in how to handle these things. Many churches that are engaged in it are going to be hesitant to pull it out because they don't want to be embarrassed having brought false teaching in. So they're going to tend to want to be defensive. But those who want to do something, instead of just forbidding reading it, I would turn that into a teachable moment.
Mhm.
Open the book, like our book, for example, and study through to say, is the Enneagram a Christian tool, or is it an occult tool? And you do what you have done then when you teach it that way, like Suzanne Stabile's book, let's say, you're doing it in a small group. Compare that with what we've said about the Enneagram and say, okay, Christian or not Christian, check one or the other. Now you're teaching them discernment so that in the future, when they pick up a book, they can know, what do I have to look for? I have to tell you, one of the things that I have done, I haven't done this in a long time, unfortunately, but I used to have churches that would bring me in for a 3-day weekend, and they would get several churches together, and I would deal with worldviews differently than Worldview Weekend. I would sit down with the high school students ready to go to college. We would lay out what each of the worldviews are, and I would point out something really important. Every book you read, film you watch, person you come in contact with, peer group you're involved with, is adding to your worldview through osmosis. You're not even realizing it's happening. You just pick it up and what you see, hear, and engage in. So you want to learn how to be aware in all of these settings. And so we go through, here's the worldviews, here's what they teach. And then at the end of that, we have a movie and a popcorn. And so they're going to watch the film. I usually use Hidalgo as the film because they have 3 distinct worldviews in the film. It's a commercially made film. And at the end, they have to tell me which of the characters, the main characters, are the most honorable, the most honest, and what they believe is the most truthful.
Hmm.
And so the 3 worldviews are animism. You've got an American Indian, Islam, and Christianity. Let me ask both of you, which one do you think is the least honorable of the three in the film.
Christianity.
Absolutely, positively. They are thieves, liars, always conniving. Which is the most accurate view of God?
Oh, Christianity.
No.
But not in the
Animism.
movie.
In the
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah,
In
probably
the
the
movie. Oh,
it's
In the
Islam.
movie.
Islam?
Animism.
Oh,
He's
animism.
oh,
the
animism. Oh,
animism.
interesting.
He's the
That makes-
hero of the movie.
In,
Oh,
in
that's
Hollywood, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, which is the most honorable? Well, that would be Islam, because he honored the animist,
Oh.
right?
Oh.
Now, once they realize that, then they go, I would have never caught that. I go, no, but
Yeah.
it does affect how you think about these issues because
Right.
it comes in by osmosis.
I did the same thing when I talked to youth groups. I would talk about if there was a real popular movie, like that had occult or New Age views. I would say, how many of you guys have seen like The Sixth Sense, which was a little boy who was communicating with the dead? And like almost every, I can remember in the youth groups where I asked that question, almost everybody raised their hand. And so then I would say, well, what's the message in this? What message do you see at the end? Because there's a very clear message. And they would like be thinking, and sometimes they would get it. They would say, oh, well, you can talk to the dead, or it's good to talk to the dead. And I said, yeah, there's a message in that movie. We have to think about that. How would God see that? So
Right.
just basically kind of the same idea. I did it
Right.
usually with movies,
Right.
sometimes popular books, but yeah, and that's a very good exercise, really, especially I think with young people, to get them to critically think and see how these worldviews are being
Interactive.
showing up in popular culture
Yeah.
and movies, etc.
Right. So I don't think I'm not for banning books. I
Right.
read a lot. I read Wiccan books. I read New Age books. Because I have to know what they're thinking. How do they come to the realizations
Right.
so that I can engage with them? But in order to do that, I have to have a sound, solid, apologetically based understanding of what's going on
Right.
to defend myself from being deceived. In fact, it's interesting. Paul, meeting the Ephesian elders, tells them in Acts 20:28 to watch out for yourselves. Guard the flock. Watch out for yourselves. Why? Well, because as he describes it, you'll have wolves creeping in, and even from among yourselves,
Cells. Yeah.
right? You'll have false teachers rising up. So even the elders and pastors can be deceived. So you've got to be watching everyone, each other, all the
Right.
time.
We're running short on time here. We could sit here and discuss this all day, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, that's right.
I'll ask Marcia this final, impossible to answer question. Looking back on the research you did and the response to the book since it came out, what's the one takeaway that you want the people watching this show or reading your book to understand about Richard Rohr, the Enneagram, and the current state of evangelical spirituality? What's the big takeaway for you, Marcia?
The big takeaway to me is know the scriptures and be discerning. Evaluate, don't take things at face value, and don't trust. I say this in a good way, don't trust other Christians. I don't mean you can't trust anybody, but don't trust something to be true just because a Christian friend of yours or a pastor says it's okay. You have to, we're accountable for our own discernment. So keep that in mind and be discerning, and just don't accept things at face value, even if they're popular and coming from Christian publishers. That's how this stuff gets in. People, it's masked in Christianity, and people think that it's okay.
Right.
Well,
So-
Don, I'm going to give you the final word here. So you have anything to add to what Marcia just said?
Nope, she's exactly right. For the pastors and elders, train your people to know the scriptures and to be discerning.
Yeah.
To the congregation, I say this, and every time I speak on the role of the pastor, I tell them the same thing. Your pastor is the singularly most accountable person in the church. They live in glass houses, and you all have Windex. So you keep each other accountable.
Amen. Well, we're going to end on that. Well, I'm Don Deal. I've been here today with Marcia Montenegro and Don Veinot. We've been discussing an area of spiritual warfare, which is what this program's about, the New Age infiltration of the church through the Enneagram, which is neither Christian nor psychologically valuable. It's simply a way to mislead and misguide the flock. Even the very big believers, even those that Christ are holding his hand, can be misled, even if they're still in his hand. I don't know that anybody has perfect knowledge and perfect faith. So please be on the lookout. There are wolves in sheep clothing out there who tell you they're bringing you something new and wonderful. Always compare it to the Word of God. Thank you both so much for being here. You guys have already given your websites and your contact information and what you do. I pray that the audience who's been listening will take advantage of those resources. This is ABNSAT's Trinity Channel. Please consider supporting ABNSAT and its wonderful mission to bring the gospel and truth throughout the world. Thank you and good night.
You are watching Trinity Channel.